The water was warm against my skin, yet it did nothing to calm the quiet storm inside me. I floated on my back, eyes closed, trying to shut out the silence that had become my everyday companion. My wife was away again, another work trip, another excuse. These days, our marriage felt more like a contract than a connection. I didn't miss her absence. I missed the feeling of being seen. The sun hung low in the sky, golden light rippling across the surface of the pool. I was alone, or so I thought, until I heard the back door creak open. I tilted my head. He stepped out, shirtless, barefoot, his hair tousled like he'd just woken from a nap. My stepson, Ethan, 23, quiet, unreadable. He rarely spoke more than a few words to me, and when he did, it was with a kind of careful distance, like we were strangers in the same house. "Didn't know you were out here," he said, eyes scanning the pool. "I needed a break," I replied, wiping water from my face. He nodded and walked to the edge, sitting down, feet dipping into the water. Silence stretched between us. But it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, almost heavy. I watched him from the corner of my eye. His jaw clenched slightly, like he was thinking too hard about something. "You swim a lot these days," he said finally. "It's quiet here. Helps me breathe." He looked at me then, really looked. His eyes, a shade lighter than his mother's, held something I couldn't name. Curiosity? Sadness? Recognition? "I get that," he said softly. "This place can feel like a cage." His voice surprised me, so did the honesty in it. I swam toward the shallow end, stood in the water, and leaned against the edge. "Didn't think you felt that way." He shrugged. "I don't usually say what I feel." Another beat of silence. Then he turned his head, our eyes locking. Something unspoken passed between us. Not desire, at least not yet, just awareness, a mirror. Two people who had nothing in common except the fact that they both felt alone under the same roof. He stood. "I should go inside." I handed him a towel. Our fingers brushed, just for a moment, but it felt longer than it should have. He paused, took it slowly, and walked back toward the house without another word. I remained still, heart louder than before. I had no idea what had just happened, but something shifted in that moment, quietly, unmistakably. And deep down, I knew. Nothing would be the same again. Ethan had been more present since that day by the pool, not in an obvious way, but I noticed. He'd linger longer in the kitchen while I made coffee, sit across from me in silence while scrolling through his phone, offer a passing comment about the news or the weather, as if testing the waters of conversation. Each exchange was brief, but it chipped away at the invisible wall between us. One evening, I found him on the back patio, headphones in, watching the rain. I hesitated at the door, unsure if I should join him. Before I could decide, he looked over his shoulder and pulled one earbud out. "It's peaceful out here," he said. I nodded and sat beside him. The rain danced gently on the roof, a quiet rhythm that filled the space between our words. We talked, really talked, for the first time, about books, music, old films. He asked questions, not out of politeness but genuine curiosity, and I answered without guarding myself, without the need to wear the mask I wore with his mother. He smiled more that night, a tired, boyish smile I'd never noticed before. "You're different when she's not around," he said suddenly. I paused. "You are too." He chuckled softly, then looked away. Funny, isn't it? Two people living under the same roof, never really knowing each other. A moment passed. The wind picked up slightly, brushing the edge of the curtain like fingers grazing skin. I should have stood up, gone inside, ended the conversation before it wandered too far. But I didn't. "I don't think I've ever had a real conversation with anyone in this house," he said. I turned to him. His gaze was locked on the rain, but his words were aimed at me. "There's a lot we don't say," I replied, more to myself than to him. He looked at me then, and his expression shifted. Softer, more open. There was no accusation in his eyes, no confusion, just quiet understanding. He reached for his blanket, his hand brushing mine in the process. It lingered, not by accident. I didn't move. I couldn't. But just as the silence thickened into something more, he pulled away gently, standing up with a nod. "Good night," he said, voice calm but unreadable. "Good night, Ethan." He left me on the patio, rain still falling, thoughts spinning. Nothing had happened, and yet everything had. I sat there long after he'd gone, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a conversation, just a moment, just loneliness playing tricks. But deep down, I knew the truth. Moments like that don't just happen. They ask for something. And something inside me had already started to answer. The evening air was thick with humidity, the kind that settled on the skin like a secret you couldn't shake. I slipped into the pool again, hoping the water would quiet the noise in my chest. It didn't. Not anymore. I swam slow laps, eyes half closed, trying to outrun thoughts that never stopped chasing me. Ethan's words, his gaze, that moment on the patio, none of it had faded. If anything, it lingered stronger than ever. And the worst part, I hadn't tried to forget. The door slid open. He stepped out barefoot, towel slung over one shoulder, shirtless again, his hair damp, like he'd just showered. Or maybe he'd been watching, waiting. I didn't ask. I just watched. "Didn't think you'd be out here this late," he said, walking to the pool's edge. "Couldn't sleep," I answered, my voice sounding too honest. He dipped his toes in, then slid in effortlessly, swimming a short length beside me. The pool felt smaller suddenly, the air tighter. "I haven't been able to stop thinking," he said, low, barely above the sound of water. "About what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stopped in the middle of the pool, turning to face me. "About how it feels when you're around, like I'm not pretending anymore." I froze. The words didn't shock me. They echoed thoughts I'd buried too deep to say aloud. "You don't have to say anything," he added. "I just needed you to know." I swam closer before I could stop myself. Only a few inches separated us now. His breathing was shallow. So was mine. "I feel it too," I said, barely able to speak the truth I'd been avoiding. He looked at me like he'd been waiting years to hear that. And then he reached out, fingers tracing the side of my face, slow and trembling. I closed my eyes. His lips brushed mine, tentative, searching. It wasn't a kiss of hunger. It was a question, an unraveling, a quiet storm finally allowed to break. The world didn't shatter. It stilled. For a moment, nothing else existed. When we finally pulled apart, neither of us moved. No panic, no apologies. Just heavy silence filled with the weight of what we'd done. "I shouldn't have," he whispered. But I didn't stop him. And that was the betrayal. Not to her, not even to him, but to the part of myself that once believed I knew who I was and what I was capable of. Ethan swam back without another word, climbed out, disappeared into the house. I stood in the water, arms slack by my sides, heart louder than before. Everything had changed, and I couldn't pretend anymore. The house felt different the next morning, quiet, but not in its usual way. It wasn't the silence of absence. It was the stillness that follows something you can't take back. I found Ethan in the kitchen, already dressed, a mug of coffee cradled in his hands. He didn't look up as I entered. His jaw was tight, shoulders drawn. The space between us felt miles wide. "Did you sleep?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He gave a small nod. "Some." I poured myself a cup and leaned against the counter. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, he broke the silence. I've been thinking about leaving. The words hit harder than I expected. Because of last night? He nodded, but his eyes stayed fixed on the floor. I don't regret it, but I don't know what it means. And I don't think we can stay here pretending nothing happened. His voice trembled at the edges, not from fear, but from knowing he was right. I didn't plan any of this, I said. Neither did I. Another silence, this one heavier, but it wasn't cruel. It was necessary. I don't hate you, he added, finally meeting my eyes. If anything, that's what makes it worse. I swallowed hard. You don't have to disappear. He shook his head. Maybe not, but I need space, time to figure out who I am outside of this house, outside of us. I wanted to argue, to ask him to stay, but I didn't, because deep down, I understood. And maybe in some twisted way, this, whatever it was between us, had always been borrowed time. He left that afternoon. No dramatic goodbyes, just a quiet hug and a suitcase. I stood by the front window long after he drove off, the coffee in my hand gone cold. The house returned to silence, but this time it wasn't empty. It was full of the truth. Days passed, then weeks. His mother returned, full of stories and souvenirs, never noticing the subtle shift in me. I played my role, nodded at the right moments, laughed on cue. But something inside me had changed. I often returned to the pool, my only sanctuary. I'd float there at dusk, eyes on the fading sky, waiting for peace that never quite arrived. Sometimes I'd remember his words, his touch, his gaze that night under the stars, and I'd wonder if he thought about it too. It wasn't love, not fully. It wasn't lust either. It was something in between, a flicker in the dark, brief but blinding. We crossed a line, but in doing so, we found parts of ourselves we didn't know existed. And while the world went on pretending everything was as it should be, I carried that night like a quiet echo. Not out of guilt, but because it reminded me that for one brief moment, I was alive.